feature of the Symbio 5.11 is that all process types are displayed without containers. So that's a very practical thing. You might remember in the past, and I'm now navigating to my process architecture. When I open a process, you might remember that in a container, the various versions of a process were shown. So that means in some of the scenarios, 3 released versions and a version which is in process. So now in this case, for all main sub-processes and scenarios, they are displayed without containers and provide faster access to the processes. So the displays shows a continuous hierarchy of the process architecture. And as before, the viewer sees the released version, and in the editor mode, the modelers receive and see just the last modified version for viewing. So in this case, I'm selecting a process with the version 1.1, and via the toolbar, you see you can go back to other versions which are in the container. So when I click on the 1.0, you see the detail content just updated, and here you see then the attributes of the version 1.0. So it's a very easy way to navigate between the different versions in one container. And the same principle applies to all your repository objects. So just to recap, in Symbio, you can also version your repository objects, and they're also, or they used to be in a container. And now when we go, for example, to the IT architecture, you see here the system project planning tool is just shown with the latest released version, that's the 3.0. And again, as before, via the toolbar, you can retrieve the previous other versions also. So the function is applicable for all processes, and to be honest, for all views you have here in your main menu. So that's the first feature. Just to summarize, all processes and all repository object types are displayed without containers. Let's move on. The next feature is that process editing is only possible by registered authors. So what do I mean with that? You might remember when you have the competency to edit or to work on processes as an author, and no author was maintained in the detail content, all users having author rights can then edit and set up a process. So the feature is then the following. I'm just going to set up a new process under the management processes. I might call it structure suppliers. And now you see a new cell here under participants in the detail content. You see there's a field additional authors. So that means, as I said, as long as no author is defined for a process, the process can be edited by several authors at the same time, as in the previous versions. And the process can be edited by several authors exactly. And from now on, a primary author, that's the author which is responsible for the release, and a secondary author can be defined. And then only the registered authors are authorized to edit the process. So that means, for example, when I maintain this guy here as the author, that means now in this database, no other author can edit the process, except you have administrative or architectural rights. So that means, let's just test it. When I log on, for example, as this person, you see that person also has author rights in the settings. When I'm navigating to the process structure suppliers, you see here on the right, Paul Manager is maintained, and I now can't start defining the process flow via this new button in the toolbar here. So I just can't. So that means the method is working, as this person, Friederike Freigeber, was not maintained as either the primary author or the secondary author. All right, let's move on. I'm just logging back as the admin, and I then continue with the next feature. So the next feature, we extended our variant management. So that means you can now create variants for main and sub processes. In the past, that was only possible for sub processes. And variants, they just define or provide an enterprise-wide overview. And we recommend that you define the variants according to your functional or location-specific differences. So that means you might have a process which is relevant to via 5 or 10 locations, and for example 80% of the content is relevant for all locations. So that means you create one process and then you generate variants of that process. So that means for each location you don't need to start from scratch then. I can just show you how that works, as some of you probably haven't used it in the previous versions. We just select a process which already exists and which already has a master version. So for example, this store good process, as you can see, you see there is a released version. And when you define variants as an admin, you would go into the admin part of Symbio on the top right. Then you click on variants. And then you see here, as a preparation, I defined, for example, a variant for Munich, Frankfurt, or for software or hardware. So again, you will probably use it for locational differences or for product-specific differences. So the first step is, as an admin, you just define the variants in the admin part of Symbio. Then you go to the process architecture. That's now the selected process. And now you see here in the toolbar, create variant. Then a dialog opens. And then via the burger, you can select the relevant variant, like you now create a variant for the location Frankfurt. So that means now a copy kind of is made of the existing released process. And now you see here on the toolbar, we are now working in the variant Frankfurt. And now you might have differences compared to the master process based on the fact that, for example, a role is different or the process flow could be different. So that means you see here, you can localize a element or localize the process flow. So for example, let's just assume for this process step, a different input might be applicable for the location Frankfurt. So that means you select the process step, you go to the toolbar and select localize element. And then you provide a reason like other input relevant. Click OK. And now you see in the graph, there's a L now part of this shape. So that means L stands for localized. So as a viewer and a user, you immediately see that this process step deviates from the master. And now I can, for example, get rid of this input and replace it by a other input, as that was the reason why we created the variant. Okay, so that's one possibility. You just select one object of the process flow, and then you change the attributes or the systems or the input outputs, and you immediately see, due to the L in the shape, that there's a deviation to the master. A alternative could be the fact that you, for example, localize the whole process flow. So let's maybe just go back. So we now have here also the view. We have the variant Frankfurt and the master. And you can obviously jump into the graph immediately via this graph here. And now, or we can also set up a third variant, for example, for the other variant I set up in the admin part, just refreshing the system. So you go to the released version, create variant, and then let's maybe just go for Munich. We jump into the graph, and now here we are working in the variant for Munich, and now we can, for example, localize the process flow. So that means the variant deviates from the master due to the fact that there's an additional process step. So the reason could be additional process step. Save it, and then, for example, first of all, you see that the flow is now deviating from the master due to this new element you see on the top left in the graph. So that just indicates you that there's a deviation to the master in the process flow. And then the deviation could be that there's an additional step after this process step, store material. And that could be, I don't know, document content could be the process step. And now you see also there's the L in the element which deviates to the master. So again, you see that here there's a change to the master, and that's now the kind of two alternatives you have. So you change the object or you change the process flow. So that's how the variant management currently works in Symbio, and it is applicable for both main and sub processes. Let's continue with a other feature. We have a translation support and translation service now integrated in Symbio, and it's just a dialogue to support the translation of attributes, and it's just a comfortable way as you can do it in the web surface immediately, and you don't need to export data to Excel. So you would obviously first of all maintain all attributes and data of your standard language, and then you see that in a dialog all other listed languages in the translation dialog are seen and can then be translated automatically. So how does that work in Symbio? You might have a role you, for example, set up like a business analyst. I'm just going to search for that role. And also the description might be takes care of administrative issues and analyzes the market. And so obviously you can also maintain other attributes, and that small text or that sentence you now would like to translate, and you see on the top of the detail content you see this button translate. When you click on that, so that's the dialogue I just talked about 2 minutes ago. And in my case, I have 3 languages set up in my database, so English, Spanish, and German. And now you see here on the left, you see the name of the role and then the description. And now you see, for example, when I want to translate it into Spanish, I just click here, translate empty fields. And now you see the text was translated from English into Spanish automatically. So there's a web service running here now behind this feature. And the web service, which has a very kind of good quality according to us, translates then the text automatically. And obviously I can do the same for German. That means I just activate this field here, and then the text is translated into German. So that's applicable for all attributes of objects. So you see now how it works for a role. I could have done the same for a system or a guideline or a risk. And it goes without saying that you can also translate process data. So the process I just set up, for example, here, I know I didn't really maintain any attributes, but just for your information, at the top of detail content, you can just open this dialog also. And here you see obviously more fields than you have for the object. So you can, it's very handy to translate the descriptions or the purpose, etc., the scope, and so on and so on. Obviously, you wouldn't translate language independent attributes like the validity, for example, or the responsibilities, as they are the same regardless of the language. So that's a very trendy features you will have in the next version. That's the translation support and the translation service. Finally, we have a new handbook for roles. So in addition to the process description, the role manual is now one of the standard manuals, and it contains all information on a role and displays its activity profile. So the information includes, among other things, the description, the responsibilities, and the details of the role. So let's just create one together. I'm going back into the repository. I select, for example, a role. I can search for it. Let's take this one. And then via manual in the toolbar, you generate the role handbook. Now that takes now a few seconds until it's generated. So as I just said, it includes information on also on the RACI profile, and on we'll have the description and other relevant details of the role. So you would retrieve it via the info bar, and then you just retrieve it here on the right, and you open it, in this case, as a Word document. It goes without saying that you can also integrate your corporate identity. And as I said, you would see then just a summary with the metadata. And then according to the responsibilities of the role, you see here the kind of RACI profile of the role for two processes in this case, and then also a statistical reflection of the role. So that's the role handbook, and it's now part of the standard manuals. Then I just have a short notice also. One other practical thing, I'm going to close that, is the fact when we go back to the process house, you can now add a sub-process within a sub-process. So that means, as you can see, when I select a sub-process, I can just add a other sub-process, for example, analyze suppliers below a existing sub-process. So you see here now there's a new hierarchy. So that was not possible before. That's a other new feature, that you can add a sub-process and also generate as many sub-processes below sub-process as you wish. All right,